Okay, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Player Education webinar on burnout, when to say no. This is a really relevant topic, and we're delighted to have Siobhan Woods on board with us this evening to share some expertise on it. Siobhan is doing a PhD in burnout, so she knows an awful lot more about it than I do anyway. And we're delighted to have her on board. Siobhan also has played with Dublin Senior Ladies for many a year, underage right up through into senior, and has had lots of experience in terms of dealing between university, work, Dublin, club, and hopefully she'll share some stories and tips with us along this evening. So welcome, Siobhan. Thanks for coming on board.
Thanks for having me. Delighted to be here.
Always a pleasure to have you. So what are we going to go through tonight? We're going to give you an understanding of what burnout is. We want to make athletes aware of the sign of burnout, how to communicate with coaches and parents, and learning how to say no. So that's going to be the 4 parts of the webinar this evening. And there'll all be some more simple and basic information rather than bombard you with it. And this is just really a taster because it's a huge area. So just to start, we want to sort of see what your knowledge is. So the first question we're going to ask, I'm going to throw up a poll, is do you know what burnout is? So really simple, yes or no. Hopefully a box has appeared on your screen and you can click on yes or no. And don't worry, if you don't know what it is, hopefully you'll know what it is.
Yeah, that's the plan.
If not, we're in trouble. Okay, so good enough response there, Siobhan. We've got a good audience. Don't know if you can see there, but 93% say that they do, or they have a thought process on what burnout is, and just the 7% that know, and they're hoping to learn from us this evening. So that's good. That means a lot of people sort of know what it is. Now, the second question, the big question is, do you ever think you've suffered from burnout? So I suppose that's more of a personal question in and around you. And we'll go through maybe signs of burnout later, and you might not think you've ever suffered burnout and you could possibly have been. So yeah, coming in close again there, really close actually. So 47% on the webinar this evening think that at some stage they have suffered from burnout, and 53% believe that they haven't. So that's probably good for us to know, Siobhan, in terms of
very good
question and going through it.
Yeah. Really interesting.
It's interesting to see. It's definitely a lot more prevalent than what we think. So here's just some basic definitions for you, and Siobhan's going to take you through them. The difference of burnout in general, and then obviously athlete burnout. And the one I'm going to highlight on the screen is actually the no. So the definition of no is actually not at all, to no extent. So we're going to give you some wee tips as we go through the presentation on burning out and the power of saying no. So that'll be later on. But really just looking at our burnout and our athlete burnout, and hopefully you'll be able to define it now. And it's the definition most of you said you knew what it was. So hopefully it matches up the definition in your head that we take you through. So over and out to Siobhan.
Yeah, so great to hear that so many people are familiar with the term burnout. I think one thing that I found when I kind of first got into the area, and one thing that I think is quite common, and when I chat about burnout, because I talk about it quite a bit now, and people are always asking me what I'm doing. So the interesting thing is, I think that burnout can be a term that is kind of used a lot. I hear about it loads in GA. Comes up a lot in articles and kind of debates, and a lot of those center around maybe the amount of matches you might be playing or the amount of training you're doing. And so in that sense, it can often be used almost interchangeably with the idea of overtraining, but actually they're two distinct things. So burnout is separate to the idea of overtraining. It's actually a psychological syndrome, and it's defined by the 3 characteristics that we see on the screen here. So the three kind of dimensions that make up burnout are a sense of physical and emotional exhaustion. So a kind of sustained feeling of being mentally and physically drained. So it's not just that, you've done a tough running session and you're tired afterwards. It's the idea that, the thought of going to training or thinking about training and thinking about sport all the planning around it or thinking about it is draining you, as well as maybe when you go out to training, you feel like you don't have the energy you might usually have. It's that kind of constant feeling of being drained or really tired. And again, it's not just maybe a one day where you're feeling tired, because that happens to all of us. It's a bit of sustained feeling, so you feel it over kind of a bit of time. So the next key dimension that we talk about is a reduced sense of accomplishment. So it's a feeling that you're not really achieving your goals or reaching your potential that you feel anyway. So this is how you feel personally within yourself. So the idea that maybe, you might have expected to be playing a certain way or playing at a certain level or performing to certain standards, and you feel like you're just not achieving what you feel you're capable of, or what maybe you might normally be achieving or playing to that level. And again, this feeling can, we all have bad days and bad performances, and that's so common, but it's just this kind of feeling that lasts a while. So constant feeling that, geez, I'm not playing like I should be playing, or I'm not achieving the goals I'd hoped to achieve. And then the last dimension is a sense of sport devaluation. So it's a feeling that maybe your sport isn't really holding the same level of importance or meaning to you as it once did. So almost kind of the sense that, Jesus, does this really matter anymore? So you're going to have these negative feelings and this tiredness. And then there's the idea that, because is it really all worth it? And again, we all have those days where you're just like, oh, that's the last thing I want to be doing today. But this is the idea that this kind of lasts over a period of time. So you're really starting to doubt whether you should be involved in your sport. So these kind of athletes that are burnt out and players that are burnt out experience these combination of symptoms. So it's not just that you're training too much or anything like that. It's these combination of feelings, and they're not just, a week or having a bad day. It's this kind of sustained feeling, and it can last for a bit of time. So if we just took on the next bit of the slide, when we talk about kind of why it's important to understand burnout. So again, now hopefully you have a better understanding of what it is, but burnout isn't just associated with those negative feelings that we spoke about there. It's also can lead to other negative consequences. So one of those being your performance level in your sport can drop. So obviously that's not what we want. We're, regardless of what level we're playing at, we want to, achieve our standards and maintain our levels of performances. So when you're burnt out, your performance levels tend to drop off. And that's obviously a negative outcome associated with burnout. But as well as that, burnout's associated with feelings of physical illness in athletes, as well as depression, so other negative consequences. So it can be linked to those outcomes as well, which obviously are very negative and what we want to avoid. And finally, athletes who are burnt out are more likely to drop out of their sport. And we already know that female athletes in particular can have issues with sport dropout, and it's something that we'd always like to prevent. So these are all kind of negative consequences associated with burnout and things that we might try and kind of stay away from as much as possible. So when we're looking at those concepts and we speak about them there, they can seem a bit kind of hard to, a bit abstract maybe, or kind of you might think, I don't know if I felt those. So when we measure burnout, there's a couple of questions that we can ask ourselves and think, kind of, have I felt this way? And again, it's important to note that burnout, there's no like clinical cutoff. There's no, I can't say if I'm a 5, I'm clinically burnt out, or I'm, in need of specific treatment or anything like that. It's just a scale, so we can see to what extent you might be feeling this way. So that's when we measure burnout, that's what we look at. So it's just a way of kind of knowing how you might be feeling and what might be the areas that we can look at. So when we're talking about physical and emotional exhaustion, some questions you might be asking yourself or some ways you might be feeling if you are experiencing this dimension of burnout would be, you're feeling so tired from training. And again, it's not just that physical tiredness after a tough session. It's the idea that you're, exhausted from all the demands and having to be here and having to be there and having to do this training and that training. And that's the kind of feeling that quite often, that's a sign of physical and emotional exhaustion. We look at a reduced sense of accomplishment. Again, the idea that, no matter what I do, I'm just not performing like I should be. And if you're feeling that quite a lot, that could be a sign that you're experiencing that reduced sense of accomplishment dimension of burnout, and that might be something to look out for. And in terms of sport evaluation, you might be thinking, God, would I be better off spending my time somewhere else? Is the effort I'm putting in here, is it really worth it? So when you start to experience these type of feelings, they're also not nice thoughts to be having and not nice feelings to be experiencing, but it's important to acknowledge them and not kind of, it's not to say that feeling any of these things, all terrible things are going to happen to you or anything like that. It's just being aware that you might be feeling these type of emotions, and that's completely fine. But what are the kind of little things you might be able to do to reduce those feelings? Or if you're not experiencing those or have never experienced those, what can we do to maybe guard against you ever experiencing those in the future? So that's kind of what we're looking to do today. And equally, if you know your friends or teammates are experiencing these, to be able to kind of to recognize that in others, and maybe say, maybe you are feeling a bit burnt out, whether a couple of things you might be able to do to maybe help with that, or prevent that happening in other people as well. So burnout is associated with a whole host of different factors. So there's no one trigger for burnout, and every athlete can respond to all these factors in a different way. I think that's the probably biggest thing to note, that when we're talking about, I think that's one of the big problems when we look at and see burnout as overtraining. It's firstly, it's quite simplistic, and secondly, it can kind of put pressure on athletes who are in the same team. So if me and you are doing the same training, how could I be feeling this way? You're not feeling this way. So we know now that it's not just the level of training. There's so many other factors at play, where two athletes are in the exact same training situation. You could be in the exact same year in school, doing the same exams, the same group of friends, have all the same, from the outside looking in, pressures, but you might respond to them in different ways. I think that's the thing. Another thing we're trying to stress throughout this is that it's a really individual experience. There's no kind of one size fits all here, and just kind of recognizing the things that might be impacting you personally, and again, that might be completely different for someone else. So the first one of those is the first factor that we know can impact burnout is the perception of stress. So the idea that athletes who feel like they have more stress in their lives, so that could be their life outside of sport, could be within their sporting environment. When you're more stressed, you're more likely to experience feelings of burnout. And again, the word perceived there is really important, because as we said, me and you could be on the same team, the same manager, could be doing the same leave insert, and I could find that all really, really stressful, and you might not be stressed at all. And so in that case, you might want to recognize that in your friends around you as someone experiencing stress. And how can we help them reduce those feelings, rather than saying, you're fine, we're all stressed. So there's things that we can do to acknowledge that. Another factor that can impact the likelihood that we might experience burnout is our motivation. So athletes who are driven by or motivated by competition and maybe achievement, these kind of extrinsic rewards, they're more likely to experience burnout. And that's not to say you're, a glory hunter or anything like that. It's just that if you're maybe focusing on comparing yourself to others and feeling like you need to be better than this person, or they did this, now I need to do this, or I'll be in trouble if I don't do this, and driving yourself on through those type of motivators, that can be quite draining, and that can make you more likely to experience burnout. In contrast, if we can focus on motivating ourselves through kind of personal goals, so what we call intrinsic motivators, so maybe focus on, when I go and do the shooting drill, I know the score I got last time, and I'm going to focus on improving my score this time, regardless of maybe what other people might have gotten. So we're looking at what we call self-referenced motivators. So trying to be the best player that we can be and improve our own skills. Those type of motivators make you less likely to experience burnout. But equally, we all operate in teams. So we all also play team sports. So we're operating in a team environment. And every team environment is its own little motivational climate. So within that climate, your manager and your teammates might try and motivate you in different ways. So certain managers might be really focused on improving everyone's skill level and making sure that, regardless what level you're at, that there's enjoyment in that session, and we're really focused on getting after our skills, and we want to make sure everyone can kick off both feet, and at the end of this session that X, Y, and Z is achieved from a footballing sense. And that's what we call a kind of mastery orientated climate. So that can be really helpful in reducing the risk of burnout. Whereas in contrast, we know that environments that really focus on competition, so they're constantly pitting players against each other, and the focus is always on winning rather than improvement, then those type of environments may create a higher risk of burnout. So that's something to be aware of. And obviously, as players, there's very little you can do to control the environment that comes from the top down, but as teammates, And we can all kind of play a role in creating that environment. So, and there's ways you can kind of help your own teammates by being aware of that. And another factor that we know can impact burnout is our sport commitment. So our sport commitment can be what we call driven by a sense of kind of obligation. So if you are playing football because you feel like other people want you to play, because you feel like, oh, I've already played for this team for 5 years, if I leave now, what will I do? Or I've training X nights a week, I've wasted all this time if I leave now. Or feeling like, I suppose, you really just can't quit. Being committed because of that reason, it means you're more likely to experience burnout. So we want to avoid that type of commitment, and instead we want to help create a sense of commitment that's driven by, firstly, just enjoying your sport, and that's one that that can be one of the biggest factors. A sense of enjoyment and feeling like you're being supported by people that are important to you. So that can be your teammates, your management team, your family outside of that. Those sort of factors can also help to drive that sense of what we call enthusiastic commitment. So they're just some of, and there are a whole host of other factors on top of these that can impact burnout. But these are just some things to be aware of. And if there's any that you might have noticed that for yourself, that could be something that you feel might have a negative or positive impact on you, they're ones to maybe go after for yourself personally. You can probably tip on the slide there. Thanks, Claire.
Yeah.
You can move on from those there. Perfect. So when we look at GA specifically, and I'm just looking at burnout in Gaelic games, it's interesting to note, I suppose, when we look at the amount of training that we might do, or I suppose any GA player does, if you compare that to other sports, could be athletics, could be obviously professional athletes or anything else, the amount of training might not seem quite that much. So that's again why we might have that problem with the idea of overtraining. So what's a couple of hours a day, even if it is every day, is that much really? And but the problem comes when we think about everything else that goes in. So we look at our weekly calendar here. You might have training with your club 3 nights a week. Then you might have a couple of gym sessions, and then on top of that, actually you have to work or study. You might have a match on Sundays, and you might actually play for a couple of teams. So we have to add in, a bit more training for the couple of teams. And then on top of that, we know that if you play for multiple teams, there's no time of year where someone says you're not allowed to train or the season's over. It could go on for 12 months of the year. So that's kind of what makes the GAA a bit unique, in that we have what we call a lot of competing priorities. So it's generally difficult for athletes to just focus on their sport, because we always have, work or study or everything else that goes on in life. And what I've found so far is that the feeling of competing priorities, so feeling like you have lots of things competing with your sport participation, that can make you more likely to experience burnout. And again, 5 people could have this exact same schedule, and 2 of them might be experiencing feelings of burnout, and 3 of them might be feeling fantastic. So it's all, again, a perception and how you're managing these things. And that's the thing to be aware of. No 2 people are the same. Perfect. Thanks a million, Claire. So yeah, we know that this can increase your feelings of burnout. So that was my little pictures there. Yeah, so I suppose that brings us on to the kind of the tips, and this was, as we probably can't emphasize this enough, that there isn't any one size fits all for this, but we are looking at little things that we can do to kind of maybe reduce that risk as much as possible. So that's kind of where this talk comes in, and Claire's going to speak a good bit more about ways that we can prioritize and say no, as the name of the talk suggests. But one thing we can look at, and the calendar kind of gave an example of that, is prioritizing. So deciding which activities are most important to you. And then if you have to start eliminating some, start from the bottom. So that can be a really, really difficult one, and one I always find difficult to do. Sometimes it feels like, well, there's nothing you can leave out. And if that's the case, it's about kind of deciding, can you do some of some and some of the others? If you have to miss a training session or etc., that can be really specific again to the person, but it's about taking a practical approach and not, I suppose, getting lost or overwhelmed by how much there has to be done, and sitting down and writing that list. Even just starting to write that list can be a really helpful step. So writing out your list of priorities and seeing actually how can you allocate your time best, and to decide, what needs this amount of time versus this amount of time. And important as that can change. You know, you might have exams for just a couple of weeks of the year, and that could be your full priority then, and that should be fully understood by anyone anywhere else. Whereas another time of year, football is the main priority. And a break, that's the one I probably can't stress enough. And so you need a rest from organized sport, ideally a couple of days a week. And for some people, they might never want to rest, and that's okay, but wanting a rest and needing a rest and using a rest doesn't make you any less of an athlete or any less committed to your sport. Generally speaking, we all benefit from rest, and ideally we'll have, you know, a good chunk of weeks where we have an off season, which, you know, might not be the case for a lot of us, but that does happen, and as much as we can make that possible, that's great. But enjoying your rest, and that's where we get that kind of mental break as well, and be able to switch off and, as suggested, you know, focus on other activities, and find other things that you enjoy and be able to do those as well. So other small things like eating right and drinking right, that's just general health benefits that we know can benefit in kind of all aspects of life and help our mental health always. Having life outside of sport sometimes can feel easier said than done, but keep in touch with friends that, you know, don't play football, and making those connections and keeping those connections is really important, because it's, you know, we're all more than just an athlete. So having that identity outside of sport is really, really important. And as much as you can love football, football might be the most important thing to you, to a lot of people, you're more than just a footballer. So remember that, and make sure you kind of make time for those relationships, be that with family and friends and everyone else. So the idea of saying no comes under that as well. And Claire will speak a bit more about how you might best do that. So keeping expectations realistic, that's another really useful one. And reframing things. I think I spoke about this when we were giving a similar talk to this previously, but the idea that, you know, we all want to set really, you know, high and lofty goals for ourselves, and that's great to at the start of the season, but we always need to set short-term goals and readjust those goals as we progress. And if things aren't looking, you know, you might set a goal for the start of the year that you want to be top scorer or whatever else you want to be, and if things don't play out that way, it's important not to, you know, write off the season. You need to reevaluate your goals and how else can you contribute, and what else can you do to feel like you are achieving and you are progressing, rather than just having that one singular and lofty goal. There's lots of others that you can kind of tick off along the way as well. Again, the really important one, that one size does not fit all. So speaking to your teammates is usually important, getting their perspectives usually important, but equally understanding that you are your own person and you have your own stressors and your own things going on, and that kind of make you unique, and how you react to situations unique as well. And the others here around the bottom, so being involved in decision making, that's a really, really important one, but obviously it can be difficult to achieve depending on the environment that you're in. So again, there'll be some pointers here about communicating with coaches, and it can be a really daunting thing to do, especially when you're slightly younger and come into older teams. But as much as possible, having your voice heard is always really, really helpful. And feeling like you have that kind of control, be it just a small amount, it can be really, really helpful as well in stopping yourself from being overwhelmed. You know, okay, I can tell my coach I have this, I can say this, and that can be really helpful as well. So yeah, trying other sports, again, something different, having clear goals. We spoke about changing your relationship with sports. So I think that probably a lot of that comes back under the idea of, you know, you're not just a footballer. So sport and the idea of sport as our hobby should always be kind of emphasized, and that doesn't diminish your aspirations to achieve what you want to achieve in sport or be fully committed to your sport. It's just acknowledging that the best way to achieve that is keep enjoying it. So placing it kind of in that context, I think, is really important as well. And the last one on the list is a massive one. So developing stress management and coping tools. So a lot of things suggested here are kind of first ports of call that we can all implement in our lives and will hopefully have positive outcomes. In some cases, you know, we're already experiencing these feelings of burnout, and some of these little changes might not make a big impact. So it can be really, really useful to work with someone. So you might be able to develop these stress management or coping tools through a course, but if you have access or can access a sports psychologist, that can be really, really, really useful. And so they will be well versed in dealing with any sort of, you know, negative emotions around sport specifically, and they can help you develop these type of stress management and coping tools that can be valuable, obviously, in all aspects of life. So even if you're not experiencing any negative emotions, I would always advocate for kind of upskilling in these areas. These tools will never kind of go to waste. So if you have access to any type of training in that front, or any psychologists, I would definitely use them as well.
Yeah, and I think just the support, you know, there's always support out there if you are feeling like that, and there is places that you can go to get that support. As you said, the sports psychologist, or even go and ask a coach, do they know somebody, or speak to somebody and reach out, and we'll probably cover that as why we go on. But I think it was probably important then that we put this up. This is actually ladies football research. You know, this is research that we have had. We have our own research, and then we have this to the right hand side, which is the impact of physical activity, you know, on it. And they ask people, and this is what I always think of, you know, why you playing sport? Why is everybody logged in here tonight? You're all ladies footballers, or you're coaching ladies football, and you're involved in that. So it's always remembering, even if it's about burnout or whatever it's about, why did you choose to play? And all the studies that we have asked people why they have taken it up always come back to the same answer: enjoyment, keeping fit and healthy, exercise relieves stress, friends, to get better. You know, that is in there, and being part of the team. But if you don't enjoy it, you won't keep doing it. And I think that can be a big aspect. And if you have any of them burnout signals or signs, you know, you have to go back to the why. You know, why was I involved in the first place? Why am I doing it? Why do I take part in sport? And try, and you talked about reframing it. I think that's really important. You reframe, you know, why am I doing this? And if you can keep that fresh in your head, and realize, if you're a coach on here, you know, these are the top reasons why girls take up sport. You can see it there, and enjoyment and fun and keeping fit and healthy are up there, you know. When you go down to the reasons why they drop out of sport in the last 5 years for females, other commitments, school, or lack of interest, or took up too much time or expenses. So it's important to realize that. And again, it's come back to why am I doing this? And if I'm feeling any signs, how do I get over it? Just before we go on, we said we would open it up to you. I'm sure you have listened to us a good bit now. So in the chat box, if you can write in, can you list the common things you need to fit into your life? So we're just going to talk a wee bit about maybe managing your time, and maybe that's why you're feeling the stresses. So if you can list some common things that you need, you feel now, if I said to you, what's the top 3 things you need to fit into your life? You know, what are they? Share them with us in the chat. That would be great. So Siobhan, if I give you 3 things, common things you need to fit into your life, what would they be at the minute?
Definitely be at the minute. PhD is a big one. Yeah. Football always, they tend to be the top 2 at the minute, and then family and friends. So trying to balance those 2 equally, and this time of year tends to be a nicer time for family and friends can kind of jump into the mix a bit more than they might other times a year.
Whenever you finally get an off season, you might have a bit of time for your family and friends.
Yeah, exactly. I got probably 2 months, well, a month there now, but before I'm doing this rehab bits again. So yeah, that's one I find difficult, and one I find that this time really important for when you have a bit of, even a couple of weeks over Christmas can be really nice. So
it's always nice to just even meet up with friends you haven't maybe seen in a while.
So nice. Yeah, and you can forget kind of how much you need it until you do it as well, which is kind of the big thing.
Say, maybe, you know, getting a break from the football friends, you know, people that don't want to talk about football.
Yeah, we laugh at that actually. You just kind of end up, you see each other every day. We kind of fell off the cliff then for a while, and then you get back and see everyone, and you always have a good time with the girls. So it's nice everyone likes going back to seeing other people, and then you kind of, actually it's nice to see each other again. So you need that break too.
Yeah, it makes it all the better. Loads of ones coming in very similar: family, work, fitness, health, studying, training, trying to fit it in, leaving cert. Yeah, completely understand that. Family, sport, health. Yeah, definitely at the minute as well. Trying to keep a healthy balance is, I think, extremely important for everyone. But when we think of all the things, I just asked you for the top 3. It was probably hard to narrow it down. When you think about all the things that you're trying, you know, nobody said work there, you know. Unfortunately, that is something we have to all fit in as well. Whether it's part-time work if you're a student, or full-time work, and whatever the pressures are with that. And some ones that sometimes we don't even think about is sleep, the importance of sleep. We have to, if you talking about tiredness and recovery and everything involved in sport, you need to be trying to nail down them 8 hours sleep a night, just to really help your body get into it. And other considerations, and these are all things we nearly must have to fit in throughout the day.
Yeah.
Eating, whether that's prepping your food, batch cooking, or going to the shop, whatever it is, everyone has to eat every day as well. And then we obviously have our school and classes, our studying, the family, the free time for the friends that we talked about, work, general stuff that people don't like to talk about, maybe having to hoover the stairs or mop the floor, or it's some of them who doing the washing, folding it, ironing it, all them little things that are all built in throughout the day and throughout the week that are musts. You have to go to the cupboard and get a fresh t-shirt on, or a fresh pair of jeans to go to university, or your football kit, it needs to be washed and ready. And then, of course, you have the sporting abilities, the training matches, and the number of teams you're involved in. These are just the basics. These are without even going over the top and thinking, what else do we need to fit in? For me, these are all really things that are general. So you quickly realize you only have a limited amount of time each day to invest in training, matches, and other activities to develop your game. You actually, when you sit down and plan it all, and if you plan your week properly, you actually only have really short pockets of windows where you can go, okay, I have maybe 15 minutes to go out into the garden and do a bit of skill development, or I have a half an hour here, I can go and do some exercises. Siobhan, you're doing rehab again at the minute. It's trying to, I'm sure for you, it's trying to find that window, where can I get my rehab in on top of everything else?
Yeah, massively. And I think I find that it's like you said, those type of chores, and the day can get away from you with the amount of things I have to do. And I've actually found that times where it's been quite overwhelming, where you just think there actually aren't enough hours in the day. So that's when it does take that bit of planning and working around things, and the idea that sometimes you might not get to do the hoovering for a week or you're meant to do it, but things do have to shift around. And I think especially things that you don't want to do, like rehab is very much not a fun thing to do. It's a lonely thing to do and a boring thing to do, and not what you want to be doing. But those type of things that you just have to make time for, and planning out your day is probably the best way to make sure you'll get those things done. Because as much as you might not want to study, you might study a bit longer, so you don't have time to do something like rehab or anything else. So setting your time out for the day is something that I found to be just really, really invaluable. And sounds so simple, and you might kind of almost do it out in your head, but writing it out and sticking to those schedules or your training plan for the week, just to make sure you get everything done. I just find I'd be lying awake at night if I don't have it done, trying to plan it all out in my head, and you think, geez, I'll never get the time. So just that kind of taking those 10 minutes to think it out, just lets your brain kind of relax and know, okay, there is enough time, I have it planned out, I can get this stuff done. Just a simple thing that I find quite helpful.
Because I was actually reading something there that they do say that if you can't sleep at night because you're thinking things, there's things going through your head, that if you actually have a pen and paper beside your bed, and if you actually just write them down, it leaves your brain and it can help you fall straight to sleep.
Yeah, you could have a book by the end of it as well.
Yeah, that's what they're saying. They're saying that you can write it down and it'll help you sleep. So hopefully it works. So I suppose what we're talking about here is about maybe managing our time, and that was the introduction to it. And then in terms of that, it's to sort of give you a coping strategy that if you manage your time, hopefully you're not feeling that stress and pressure. And without feeling that stress or pressure, hopefully you won't ever come across any signs or symptoms of burnout. So they're all interlinked. And this is a wee task I loved, and I just think it's really important for time management. It's something we don't think about. If you can see the jar, we're trying to fill the jar. This is the aim of the time management. If you put all the sand in first, you won't have any room for the rocks. That's just a fact. But in that jar is your time. It's your life. If you put the rocks in first and you think about what your priorities are, and you load in all your rocks, all your big things, and they'll all fit straight into that jar. And it'll still give you a bit of room to put in some pebbles, which are your smaller tasks. They're not as urgent, but they're still important to you. And they will fit in around the rocks when you time it, you can plan properly. And then your distractions are your sand. And sometimes you do want a wee bit of a distraction. But if you stencil in a bit of sand in between the pebbles and the rocks, it'll all fit when you plug it all into that jar. But if you do it the other way around, where you put the sand in first or the pebbles in first, the jar will fill and there'll be a gap and there'll be no space for your priorities. And I think that's the key message for time management that we're trying to get across. Siobhan nailed it in one. Take that 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes on a Sunday night or whatever day on Monday morning and plan your week. This isn't just, we had Emma Dugan on last night talking to our minors, and that was one thing she stressed. At 19 years of age, she said she plans her week, every hour. And she said, there was somebody said there about their leaving cert. She said she only did her leaving cert there, and she even planned her studies, how long she was studying, what set a goal, what specific subject she was doing. But it's all about knowing your priorities and then going to the pitch, or time for that. It's about choosing what they are. So what are them rocks in your life? You have to pick that. It's individual here. Siobhan's rocks are going to be different than mine, and our 2 rocks are going to be different to you, depending on where you want to be as an athlete. It'll shape differently, but the key concepts are all the same. You have to decide what they are. What are your goals, your commitments, and they're the most highest priority. That's what you have to do. That'll help keep you on track and keep you balanced. But you have to decide what your priorities are. And to me, that all comes into planning, and then it'll link in with the time management. So a really good time management exercise that you can maybe do at home this evening after the webinar, or you can set aside a bit of time, is, set aside some time to actually be organized. And I'm talking about spending 20 or 30 minutes to plan your incoming week. Sit down, have your Monday to Sunday or Saturday wrote out. Make a list, what's important to you. So what has to go in, and be really aware that weekdays are going to look different to weekends, because you might have school during the weekdays that you have to filter in, so there's 5 or 6 hours there, or you might have work, so 9 to 5 is already filled for there, but you might have a bit freer time on a Saturday and Sunday to do something that's maybe not as important to you. And the other thing to realize is your weeks can change depending if it's in season or out of season. Whether you're playing school football as well, or whether you're playing college football, then your week looks completely different, because you could have an O'Connor Cup game on a Wednesday night and training with the college Monday, Wednesday, and still, if you're lucky enough to be maybe in club championship, your whole week can look so different. So it's important that you look at your week so you can actually spot, oh wow, this is crazy, look how much I've on this week. I have to sort of knock something back here for my own self, or it's going to go out the window. So it's about prioritizing. Something that people don't do. Print out. If you don't have it written in front of you, you won't lose it. Have it. And if you don't want to, if we're going green and you don't want to use the printer and all of that, type it out in your notes in your iPhone or your Samsung. You can save it and you can have it as your lock screen, and that'll let you know exactly, look, this is what my plan is for the week. So don't be afraid to actually sit down and write it out, so you actually know where you're at. And set the goals for the week. So we talked about short-term goals. Don't be afraid to set a goal for the week. So it's short-term, medium, and long-term. So you always feel like you're doing better. You always feel like you're moving forward. And adding things that's important. It's important to have a balance in your life, and hopefully we've stressed that. You have to leave a bit of space in your time management for other things, for maybe a friend or meeting someone for a coffee, even if it's for 20 minutes, or a phone call or a Zoom call, just for you, just to take a break from it all. But it's really down to planning, and hopefully can't stress that enough. The more you plan, the easier it is. And we'll have a wee example here. This is actually an example stolen from the Dublin Senior Ladies. It was a player profile sheet that they had before. And Siobhan, I don't know if you want to sort of talk us through it. This is an example of a weekly tracker.
Yeah, so I think it's the days of the week and the type of training that you have on each day and how long it will last. So it's great. And one thing you might suggest when you're probably teams, you have their pre-year meeting and everyone's saying we're all going to be doing this, we're all going to be doing that. But if you can actually sit down with the management, or if you are involved in management, to set something like this out for players. So what's your commitment going to look like this year? We're going to have X number of pitch sessions on Tuesday, Wednesday, Saturday, or whatever days. they're going to last this long. And I think that's a really important thing, that as a player, if you have a voice, to use that and stress the importance of sticking to these schedules. As a manager who controls the length of sessions, that you stick to those durations. So you say we're going to train on Tuesday, Thursday and Saturday for X amount of time, and that's what we do. And we say we're going to be in the gym on however many mornings a week, and that's what we do. And I can never stress enough to anyone involved in management or any player who has a chance to ask for it, how useful a calendar can be for players. So if you know in advance, even for a month, we know this month we're going to be training in this place at this time, this many days, it just makes it so much easier for players than waiting on, changing plans or changing times. And equally for management to stick to those time lengths of sessions, because like we say, as players, you're doing all this work to plan your day around a schedule. And I think the kind of management acknowledging that how busy you are can just, even that tiny bit can be really useful, saying we know you're really busy, so we're just letting you know in advance, these are the days we're going to train. This is the type of training it will be. It could be on the pitch, could be just gym, whatever. This how long it's going to take. So you can fit that into your life and work around it. So I think something like this probably even more useful for a manager to give out to their players than it is. But obviously once you get your schedule, or if your managers tell you this, you can fill this out yourself. And it's just a great way to see at the start of the week, okay, how can I fit everything around? If I have a gym session, for example, and I'm really busy, can I do that myself in a morning or evening that suits me better? Could I ask for a bit of flexibility around the gym session? Obviously that's more difficult with pitch sessions, but those are small kind of bits of leeway you might be able to get if you're in a really busy week. So seeing that ahead of time, and ideally in a month in advance or however long you might get your schedule, allows you to kind of flag those things early. And it's just the idea that we spoke about earlier, that perception of stress. So having the feeling of being in control of your time and knowing what's coming, that reduces that feeling of stress. So if you're thinking, God, I wonder next week, are we going to be training on this day? And I actually have to arrange that. And I thought I was going to go there, but he hasn't said what day we're training on, or what if we have this, or that just all adds to that feeling of stress. That's what we want to try and avoid. So none of these things are going to, as we said, no one thing is going to change your whole world, but these small things can actually have a massive impact. So anyone who is involved in that kind of management level, don't underestimate the benefit that can have on players knowing in advance their training schedule. And as a player, don't be afraid to go and ask that, because often managers will have it all planned out, they just might not think to share with you as a player. But equally, even if you get it in a short term in advance, try and stress as much as possible how useful it is to have that information. And when you have it, then do use it to plan your time around it.
I think one of the big things you don't even think about is even venue, knowing where your training is, because you're trying to build in the commute then as well. Yeah. How much extra it's going to take me to get there, what time am I having to leave at, which is, it can lead to another stressor. So it's about it's probably bringing us into our next thing is really it's going to so much help in terms of you're a good communicator, and if you can communicate well, it's going to solve a lot of problems. So the basic action of communication is it's an act of expressing ideas, information, knowledge, thoughts, and feelings, as well as understanding what is expressed by others. So that's important. It's both two-way, and sometimes people get caught away that it's only one way, but communication done effectively is definitely two ways. The communication process involves both sending and receiving messages, and can take many forms, or verbal or non-verbal, or listening, or body language. They're all elements of communication. So what we're going to ask you again, just to get you back involved here, is how do you rate yourself in relation to effectively communicating with your coaches? So if you're a player on here with us now, how do you think you communicate with your coaches? Would you rate yourself as excellent, good, or need to improve? They're all clicking away now. Let's give it another second. I'm not really surprised by this, Siobhan. The results show 90% believe that they need to improve their communication with their coach. and 10% believe that it's good, 0% believe that it's excellent, you know, which can be quite worrying because it's such a powerful tool that's needed in relation to communication, and it's so important in terms of making sure that you're on the right path. So what we'll ask you now is, how do you rate yourself in relation to effectively communicating with the likes of your parents, or maybe possibly teammates, you know, off the pitch? How's your communication with them? Does it change? Yeah, so we can see a change. There's definitely a change in terms of it. If you look at it now, you know, 10% have went to their communication is excellent, and 60% have went to good, and 30 have went to need to improve. And I suppose that's really important, because you should be able to communicate with that person in charge of your team, your coaches, because they're going to be a main factor in being able to support you if you are starting to feel effects of burnout. And they're going to be able to definitely point you in the right direction. But if they're unknown to the element of it, if they're completely unaware that you're feeling like this, or they might see, oh, there's Siobhan. Sure, Siobhan's been rubbish for the last month. Like, what's wrong with her? She's hardly able to even kick the ball anymore. Siobhan never comes around and tells her coach, oh, you know what, I'm not feeling great. I just can't get myself up and motivated, because she might be completely unaware that she's suffering from burnout or what burnout is. And the coach is just thinking maybe Siobhan's being lazy, or like she just really doesn't care anymore. And it's not the fact at all. And I think that's why we couldn't stress enough the importance in terms of communication.
Yeah, and on that, even like when you are feeling that way, it can be even more difficult to express it, because oftentimes we're, you know, wonder ourselves how we're feeling. It's hard to articulate or, you know, explain why you are feeling that way, because there might, again, as we said, there might not be just one reason why you're feeling this way, or an explanation you can give, or something you can go and ask for that will make it better. But that's not what the key point is. The key point, as you said, is sharing the information. So letting someone know that you feel that way. So what we actually have in place is a leadership group, which, so we saw the big difference between people that were comfortable speaking to their management, people that are comfortable speaking to their teammates. So if you have, so I've been there a while, so it's maybe it's not so bad for me, but there's always new people coming into a team, and that can happen on every team. Someone's going to be new, or someone's going to be not so comfortable speaking. So we saw in that poll, people are a lot more comfortable speaking to their teammates, or maybe even to parents. But if we want to keep it within a team, which is generally a useful way of doing it, if you have people that you can designate, could be your captain, it could be a group of, we generally have 5 people that change year on year, that I just work as kind of a go-between between the management and the players. So no matter who you are, we could make sure there's kind of someone who's younger on that group, and then people who are older and more experienced, so that if anyone is having issues or something that they don't feel comfortable going with directly to a manager, if they're new or they're not confident speaking to them, you can maybe share that with that playing group, and then they can go to the management for you. So ideally, we want people to be able to have an open relationship with the management team, or someone they can speak to. But if not, to be able to kind of, if that's something you could suggest within your own team or work to develop, or if you're confident being that person and someone else isn't, being that go-between, because the most important thing, like I said, is that message get passed on. And more likely than not, the manager or whoever it is will love to speak to that player and help them as much as possible. But like I said, unless they know someone's struggling, they can't help. So even just sharing a word with a teammate, if you have that kind of group of people that are kind of the go-between, it can be really, really helpful. But the biggest thing is, when you know you're feeling this way, in any aspect of life, you know, at sport or anything else where it's not going so well for you, you're feeling down about things, you always know that you feel better when you start to speak about that. And you can start off with your teammates or your parents, but in this context, it is really important to share it with your manager, because like you said, and I've been there when I actually experienced feelings of burnout, and someone could end up just coming right on top of you because you haven't shared what you're feeling and you're not performing, and then it just exacerbates the whole situation because you feel even more terrible. So it doesn't work itself out on its own. So it does absolutely help to go and speak to people. So I couldn't recommend that, or kind of follow up on your
On your leadership group, would you select that as players, or would the management put that in place every year of who they are?
It has kind of varied on different years. So generally the captain and vice captain would always be on it, and then there'd be 4 other people, and it has varied. Sometimes players have picked it, sometimes management have selected, and the last 2 years there's been a kind of younger cohort that have been included into it as well, to make sure that there was no gaps there. So generally it's been a group of between probably 5 or 6 players. Generally speaking, in the last couple of years it's been chosen by management, but there'll be a lot of input, more so probably chosen by the captain and vice captain, because they have a good understanding of pretty much the aim is that everyone has someone that they'd be well comfortable speaking to. There's different dynamics. We're lucky that we probably all speak to each other, but making sure that there's not just one clique of people that are in the leadership group, that you're well connected to the whole team. And it just is a really good way of working itself out. And it might just be something small. It could be someone wanted to go anonymously, but having that line of communication, as I said, ideally everyone feels they can speak to the manager, but that's not always the case. And that's, we need to put in those steps down the way that can make it as easy as possible for the information to get passed along, even if someone isn't that confident speaking directly.
Yeah, it just shows a completely different way of communicating, as you say, directly and indirectly.
Absolutely.
There's ways around it, and the key message to it is, if you aren't comfortable speaking to the coach, there is people there to speak to. Don't let it fester. I think that's itself, and that's why you'll know. You have to know yourself, and you do know yourself deep down. You know yourself. So how do you like to communicate? Are you direct? Do you even think of yourself now? If you have something to share somebody, do you text or do you pick up the phone and ring someone, or do you not say, come on, we'll go for a coffee and speak face to face? The world's changing so much. I would say majority of us now have switched on their head. I would say 80% of people are more comfortable now in terms of communicating via text message than anything else, which isn't always a good thing, because sometimes it's not like you can hide on a text message, or messages can be misinterpreted. But you can't hide if you're sitting face to face with a friend or a manager or a coach. They know by your face straight away, which is another term of the communication. They know by your body language. Siobhan's telling me lies here. She really isn't feeling great. I've asked her, look at her eyes have went, and she's, her left hand's tremoring. That's something you can't see in a text
quiver.
That's something you don't see in a text message, but it is important to realise them methods are still in and around there. All players have their own preference regarding communication and their style. Not all players like talking or being in the centre, so that's why I really wanted to push that leadership group. Some people aren't comfortable speaking out in front of the group, but they'd be very happily to talk to Siobhan one-on-one, and that's equally get their message across, because she might be more confident to speak to the group. And it's a big thing for you and your team to create the right environment, and this can be really important as well. When is the right time to talk to a coach? That's important. If you are about to go out for a championship final, it's not the right time to talk to the coach 2 seconds before the throw-in. The right time to talk to the coach is when you have a bit of time, and I think that's important that both of you have a bit of time and space and privacy, that you can have this conversation with. And sometimes it can be done before training or after training or away from it, depending on how you want to deal with it or what the situation is. But having the right time to talk to them is important, and having the right time to speak to a parent if things aren't going your way. Not surprising somebody with it, sitting them down, and the same with the teammate. It's all about timing. And in saying that, sometimes if it's bottled up and you need to speak, and you just need it. Sometimes you can't hold it back, and that's fine too. But the big one here is build a relationship with your coach. I don't think there's enough of that on. You have to build a relationship. Share stuff with them. Share your thoughts. Share even saying to them, and when you come in the door, which I'm sure most coaches do, they're standing at the door, they're standing in the training field, and they'll greet you and they'll say, hi Siobhan, how are you? Our automatic reaction for us all be, yeah, grand, fine. And we'll run on past with the head down. Why not trying something different? Why not take that second to stop and say, oh, sure, things are great, or I played college football last night and we won, or I'm starting and I'm doing driving lessons now, or, whatever, maybe sharing something small with them. And that just opens up. They might say something small back to you, and that's the greeting over for the day, but you've actually opened that up. Now the coach doesn't just see you as a number. they actually know something about you. So if we're talking, go, oh no, look at Siobhan might be a bit tired. Put her out of the sprints. She was telling me earlier on the way in the door, she played DC, were playing UCD last night, and sure, she's probably a bit tired. You mightn't have known that unless you greeted them on the way in the door. So it's important, even small things. Sure, that's how you build a relationship with somebody. It's by both asking questions and listening. The big one for me is being honest as a communicator. I think if we all stick by this, we'll be a lot better. Being honest creates trust, and you're able to give honest feedback, and you are able to voice your concern. Having an open relationship, be truthful and be honest. In the long run, it can be really hard to do. And you mightn't like it, but because you're going, oh, I don't want to say this, but a lot of the time that's in your head. They're your own thoughts holding you back, and you're not giving that other person a chance to respond, because you're building it all up inside you. And the more you hold it in and don't let it out, the more it creates. So be honest, and if you have a concern, voice it. Action. And Siobhan did move this earlier. Ask the coach, is there an agreed plan? Where do you fit in the plan? What's our week like? What's our month like? I do feel a bit stressed, so if I knew we had a challenge game on this weekend, that weekend, it would really help me move around my study or move around my work. Work are being really stressful with me at the minute. They're making me work late evenings, or they're making me work every Saturday. So if you could tell me, I can ask for time off. So it's really just opening up them doors, and being open and honest, and just going and talking. The coach is a human being, so go and don't be afraid not to talk to them. It all is a part of it. I'm going to touch very briefly on the saying no part before we have any questions. So if you have any questions, if you want to start throwing them in the chat, we'll get to them now. But to me, this is such an important part. And I'm going to tell this very brief story before it, and it was again only learned it last night from Emma Dugan. She actually said to the minors last night, she was like, she had to learn to say no. She was playing for Meath she was called under the Meath senior panel at 16 years of age. She was playing school, she was doing her leaving cert, she was playing 16, she was playing minor, she was playing senior club, through it all. And she said her body started breaking down, and she was getting a lot of injuries, and she said she wanted just to please everyone, and we know that girls actually find it a lot harder to say no than boys. Girls will keep going to training, they'll keep showing up, they'll not tell that they're tired, or they've did it, or maybe already had a game yesterday or that day. We'll keep on going. And she said once she actually learned to say no, she was able to clear up her injuries, she was able to manage her time better, and she said it was one of the things that has changed her completely, her performances around it, and changed her around. And she actually said to them it was the power of saying no. And I think the big thing is, I have a wee quote there at the bottom, ultimately saying no to something is saying yes to you, because you can't be things to all people. So getting into, you have to sometimes, being no is the right thing for you, and it isn't being selfish, it's looking after yourself, because there's sometimes you just can't balance it all, when we said about putting everything out there. So saying no, and it's a really important aspect, and it's something I don't think girls are particularly good at. They're happy just to put the head down, and then they start feeling demotivated, etc. So when we're saying it, keep it simple. If you want to say no, be firm and direct. You don't have to be rude. That's not the point here, but you can say no, like, I just really don't have the time. Because if you say maybe, girls, they keep pushing it. All right, that's a yes then. How many times have you said maybe and somebody goes, oh yeah, that's a yes. All right, you're in. And you're going, hi, in your back of your head, you're going, how am I going to fit this all in? I think Siobhan had that with me when I asked her to do this.
No, not at all.
But you can think of examples throughout you all the time where you're going, how can you do this? So be clear with the request. If you're really not sure about it, this happens all the time. Somebody asks you something, and in a fluster you say yes, and then afterwards they've literally walked away from you, and you go, I don't know why I said that, I really don't want to do that. I say we are all thinking that right now, going, how many times that happened to us? Why don't we try to be mindful in the moment? Take a deep breath, and count, take them seconds in your head, and then answer., give yourself that breathing space to think, do I actually have time for this? and will this benefit me, and will I enjoy doing it? And that's where I bring in, be true to yourself. And I know it sounds funny, people talk about the clothes, holding up the clothes, or when you're doing up your wardrobe, does this jumper bring me joy? And I know it sounds silly, but when we're thinking about doing an activity, you should think that, does this make me happy? So, if somebody's asked you to go and do something, or something on top of another, will that make you happy? If it doesn't, guys, you say no, because it's just going to be another pile, another stress on top of your head. So think to you. Sometimes compromise can save you. You mightn't have time to do it all, but you might be able to do parts of it. So you might be able to say to somebody, I actually, can we split that? Or could I come for a half an hour? And that could save you, because you do maybe really want to do something, but you don't have time to give a whole day. So you might say, could I pop in for a half an hour or an hour? They might want you, especially a lot of ones, would you come in and take a coaching session for our under 10s? They're really mad, Siobhan, you're a role model. It's great to give back to the club, and you're going, I have to do A, B, C, D, and E. But you're going, oh, when I was their age, I would have loved to see it. So what you might say is, look, I don't have time to come in and do a coaching session for an hour now, but I could maybe pop in for 10 minutes at the end and say hello and give out medals at the end of the year. Or, it's a compromise. So don't be afraid to think, that is something I would like to do, but I don't have 2 hours to give up, but I have 10 minutes. Can we fit it around and make it work? Keep it friendly. Saying no to people, particularly if you're used to saying yes, can be challenging, and people might stop in their track and go, oh, she said no to me. What's that all about? And take it sometimes as a personal rejection. So get on top of it. Be clear. Don't be afraid to maybe use some positive affirmations around it. I think what you're doing is amazing. It's a brilliant idea, but I'm sorry, I just can't help you right now. That's a really easy way to say no. You're saying, it's brilliant, I'd love to be able to help you, I just can't. Just not at the minute. I'd love to work with you, but it's not possible, maybe in the new year or whatever it is. But saying no to multiple things is so you can say yes to the right one for you. So don't be afraid to say that no. So Siobhan, I don't know if you have any tips in that, saying no, or
no, that's also something that I continue to struggle with massively. That idea of letting people down, and I think you're so right that girls struggle with it more so. I know personally, I'm trying to be such a people pleaser for things like that, where you're just like, and there for a lot of times you can fit it in, and it is nice to do, and you are glad you did it for those type of things, helping people out. But you're so right, and there are occasions then it's going to be less often where you have to say no, but there are the one or two that, like on that scale there, put you over the edge, where if you say yes, that one extra thing, it just adds that one bit to the pile that you just can't manage. So I think you're so right. And I think the idea of, offering what you can give, be that, slightly less time or something later on at a different stage, I think is really, really important. But it's all like these things come down to kind of building confidence in yourself as a communicator and as kind of a person, which I suppose maybe we don't always foster in a team environment or as young women or anything else. So kind of that might not come naturally, but these are all opportunities to kind of, I suppose, stand on your own feet and come from, build those kind of skills. So the idea that you can, do what suits you best, like I said, doesn't make you happy. In any walk of life, is there a way you can maneuver it that it would make you happy? So if that's less time, if that's an alternative option, if that's saying no, I think that's a massive thing, and probably something that we don't consider enough. And I think that's really good advice, and I could have done with that, I'd say 10 years ago.
I'd say all of us could. As I say, it's such a big part of it. It's something we actually don't talk about, but saying no is so important for you in terms of how you feel, how you're preparing and how you're communicating. And as we say, we can communicate it in such a nice way. It doesn't have to be, nobody needs to fall out over it, but you have to understand your body, your feelings, your thought, your mindset, that one thing could tip it over. So, and if you plan, you manage your time, you prioritize, they can all help you with saying no. And sometimes you have to practice saying no. Okay, I'm gonna practice. This is what I'm gonna do. Don't be afraid to do that, but please don't be afraid to say no if it's going to save you in another department or later on or with your own performance. And as I said, sometimes saying no is saving yourself in the long run. So we have to look after number one sometimes, Even though I
Absolutely.
know as girls we definitely don't like it. If you hear boys, they'd be like, "Oh, I trained last night, or I played a match last night. There's no way I'm going to train for the club." And you look around, and the girls are still slogging away with their. It's different mindset, so it's about trying to change that and realizing that saying no isn't a bad thing. So just some take-home messages for us. For me, anyway, it's be aware of the signs of burnout. Sometimes we think we know what burnout is, but do we really? I think a lot of people mistake burnout for overtraining, Siobhan. I think that was the big key thing for me again here today, re-emphasizing that it's not overtraining, it's a psychological thing. So don't be afraid of that. And it's really important to rest and recharge. So don't be afraid to take that rest time. Make time for what's important to you, because that'll help you in the long run. Communication is always key, and communicate with the people around you. And hopefully you'll find a balance in your life, and practice saying no, for me anyway. And no matter how busy life gets, make the time to take care of yourself. Siobhan, I don't know if you have any take-home messages. I'm just going to see if there's any questions in here.
Yeah, no, that kind of hits the nail on the head for me. I think that I always find, much to how often you look at these things, when you go back and revisit it at the kind of practical level, it's always just so useful in thinking about, I especially get into all the data and the reading and everything else. When you look at it actually as a player from the playing level, just really important things to remember, and you can tell everyone else about it and talk with people about it, but the things we can apply to our own lives, we can always, there's always room for improvement. I think that's probably the biggest thing. And yeah, the more we're aware of all these things, the more we can take care of ourselves and take care